Hey guys, welcome back. This is another video that we're going to do. It affects Ubuntu server again, and we're looking at Samba. And we're looking at Samba in relation to allowing our Windows operating systems to access file systems that are primarily set up on a Linux server. And so here you'll see that I've got my Linux server. And I've also got a Windows XP machine so that I can show you how it works. So let's get straight into it. Hopefully this will be a quick video. I've done a bit of the pre-install work, so it should work fairly well. We can just talk it through and you guys can take the time to do the install. So from the command line we need to sudo everything because I'm not root user. Once again sudo apt-get because we're going to do an install and we want to install Samba. So that's it. That line there will get Samba installed. You can put extra software or install extra software packages if you like, but that'll do the job for us. All we want to do is get file system sharing with Windows, and so that's all we'll need. So you type that in and hit enter. It'll go off to the repositories, download and install Samba for you, which I've already done. So the next thing we need to do is a sudo nano, because we're going to do some editing of some text files. Sudo nano, and you'll see that we've got a new directory now on our system called Samba, and it lives in the ECT directory Samba, and there's a file there called smb.conf, and we need to play around in that file. There's a lot in this file. It's pretty hectic in there, but you'll see that a lot of it is commented out, so it's not actually going to run. A lot of it is just explanations. Some of it we can uncomment to run, but we just need to uncomment one particular area at the moment. So we're going to go down to authentication, and we're going to go down to security user, and that's saying that we want to use a user to manage security, and we're going to uncomment that. So all I did was I took away the hash symbol and left it open or on, and then we need to add a line of code, and that line of code simply says that when it comes to users and who has access to what, we need to put a map in there, and so we're going to use a term called a user name map, and we're just going to tell it where that lives. And so it doesn't live anywhere at the moment, we've got to create it, but we're going to put it into the ECT Samba directory, and we're going to call it smb users. You need to remember that because we're going to create that file in a very short period of time. So we're going to save that, Control X, yes to save, enter, and we've done our first lot of configuration. The next thing we need to do is actually create a couple of users. Now the first user we need to create is an actual Linux or Unix user, and so that's a user that we're going to create on our system, and then we're going to map that through to a user that we're going to create in Samba. And so the Samba user won't create unless we've already got a Unix user created. So the first command that we need is sudo add user, and we've used this command before, and we need to give it a username. Now I'm going to use student-samba or SMB. The reason I'm doing that is I want to actually make sure that I don't confuse the user student that you log on to when you're at TAFE with the user student that we're going to use with the Samba. So when you actually log into your Windows machines and you try to access this server, if we're using student with password 1 as the password, then it's not going to ask you for a username and password when you try and access the Linux box, because it's already got it in its cache, in its memory. So we just add this user, and it's asking for a username, password. So we're just going to use password 1 as we do with all our users, and we're going to confirm that password, and that's done. So it's asking for more additional information. I'm just going to select, go through with that, and select the defaults, and that should be set up for us now. The next thing we need to do is create a Samba user. Very similar. Sudo smb password. Okay, so you've set up passwords before. This is just using smb password instead of just password, and we want to do a -a, and again it's going to be student -smb. New password. Let's make it the same password. And that's been added too. So those two areas that we need to add. We need to add a user into the Unix or Linux system, and then we're adding a user into Samba, and we've done that. The next thing we need to do is create this file that we referenced in the smb conf file before. So it doesn't exist, as I mentioned before, and so we're going to create it now. So just using a text editor, I'm going to do ect samba smb users. Down the bottom, under just above the menu, you'll see that it's got get help, write out, read files, previous page. Just above the read file and previous page, you'll see that it's got new file, and that's telling us that we're creating a file that doesn't exist at the moment, and that's pretty cool. So we need to do student equals student-samba, I should say, smb equals, colons are important, student-smb colon, and that's going to map those two together, so that's fine. And we can save that, exit, yes, done. Alright, we're nearly there. The next thing we need to do is we actually have to set up some sharing definitions or parameters around the share that we're going to create. And so to do that, I need to go back into a text editor, ect samba. We're going straight back into the smb conf file, and we're going to scroll down through this file until we get to a section that talks about shares and share definitions, and there it is there. So there's a few examples there. You can read through the examples, different ways in which we can configure this, but I'm just going to set a fresh section at the top here, get some white space, and the first thing I'm going to do is define the actual share name. So I'm going to call my share data, and I do that by putting it in square brackets, the word data, and that's saying that now that will be a share, and I've got to add some definitions or some parameters to that to define what that share will look like. What that means, if we go over to my Windows machine and I go start run, when I type in the IP address of the server I'm working on, which happens to be 192.168.100.36, and hit enter or OK, then it will actually bring up all the shares on this server that are Windows shares that can be accessed from a Windows machine. And what I'm doing there is saying that one of those shares will actually be called data. But I've got to give it some parameters, and I'm going to do that now. The first one is I'm going to put a comment section in there, and so I'm just going to call this one data directory share. Just a bit of information for users when they log on. The next thing I need to do is give it a path, and so from last week's lesson you will have remembered that we've got a path on mount called data, and that's where my LVM volume is pointing to. So it's pointing to a directory called mount/data, and so that's where I'm going to set this share up on. I want to be able to access those files. This next area is to say that guest OK equals no. We don't want guests to be able to access this machine or this share. We want them to have a username and password. Browsability, or being browsable, is fine, so we're happy to say yes to that. You can browse through the system, and we want to create a mask setting the different permissions that will be used when you're in there, and so we're saying that it should be 0755, and I'll leave that up to you guys to work out what that means. I'm sure you can work it out now with the information you've got. So read only equals no. So we need to specify that it's read only no. If I leave that blank, sometimes it gives us a few problems. And that's it. That's all we need to put into this section here. So I can close up some of that white space, and I'll do a Control X, yes to save, enter, and we should be pretty happy with that. The last thing I need to do is I want to change the ownership of the mount data, the / mount data directory. Because at the moment it will either be set to another user that I've assigned permissions to it, or it will be set to root. And so if I'm not logging onto my Windows from my Windows machine as root, then I'm going to have problems with permissions. So to make that really simple and easy, what I'm going to do is, let's do an ls on mount data, make sure it is there and everything's okay. There it is. I've got a few text files in there. I've got a couple of files I created in Linux, file 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, probably just touched those up. And so what I want to do to that directory is I want to change the permissions. So I'm going to do a sudo again, change owner. I'm going to do a -R, and so what that means is that it will do it on that directory, change the ownership of that directory, plus any subdirectories living underneath it. So, so it's recursive. And then I need to tell it the user, so it's SMB, and the group. That's going to take ownership. So student-SMB and the group student-SMB are going to be the new owners of this directory, and we'll give it the directory that they're going to be owners of. And that should have worked. Let's check that to see whether it did. So we'll do an ls-l mount data. And it tells me that, yes, student-SMB is actually the owner now. So that'll fix up all my permissioning. So let's check that now. Let's go over to my Windows box, and I've done a start, run, type in / the IP address of the server that we want to communicate with. So there's my Linux IP address. And it brings up a share of data, and then it lets me in. Now it didn't ask me for a username and password, and it should have, and when it did, and that's probably because I tested this before I ran through the video, but for you guys it should ask you for a username and a password, and you'll be able to put that in as student-SMB, password 1 with capital P, and you'll have access into this system. Now let's just make sure that I do actually have, okay, I don't have, and that's because it's cached and it's remembered it. So I'm just going to log out of this for a sec. It's remembered the old settings that I had in there, the old password and username and password that I used. So let's just try and go back in. Okay, so now it's student. Alright, let's start again. Student SMB, password 1. There you go, I'm in. Let's see if I've got right access. New folder. There you go. In the folder, let's chuck a couple of files or a file. Done. Let's chuck another one in there. Done. Let's come over here and check that under our Linux machine. Okay, there's the new folder I created in blue. New folder, and there's the 2 files that I just created in there, as you can see. these two files are now represented here in my file system. So that worked fine. The little hiccup that I had was I'd actually run through this prior to doing the video, and I'd run through with a different user, and it was a bit confusing, the username I'd suggested, so I redid the video, but it had cached access to that share, and I just needed to log off and log back on again, and that fixed it. So sorry about that, but I'm hoping that makes sense to you. Alright, thanks guys, we'll see you in class.